Welcome back to Behind the Waitlist. Today's episode, we're going to explore women's mental health and why it is often very different to how we usually see and talk about mental health in general. Women's mental health is so deeply overlooked and misunderstood. When we talk about women going through specific life transitions like menopause to even pregnancy and postpartum, they are so different and more intricate. And the statistics that I have been learning and I'll speak about on today's episode are so startling. I recently learned that 1 in 6 women in England are on antidepressants at any one time. 1 in 4 women in England are suffering with a mental health condition. I don't believe we speak about women's mental health as much as we should be speaking about it. We have the leading cause of maternal death being suicide. We have 30% of women with PMDD attempting to take their own life. We have a third of women of menopausal age feeling depressed. Yet most people don't understand the symptoms of menopause. Most people have never heard of PMDD, even though it affects 5% of women. And most people are under the impression that pregnancy is just something that everybody does, which totally disregards the severity and mental and physical challenges of the conditions and life changes that solely affect women. Women need support, women need community, women need to feel heard during these times, which are evidently from data really challenging. So today on the pod, I've invited Dr. Jessica Katanga, who is a medical doctor specialising in psychiatry, whose motto is self-care is healthcare. I love it. So I'm so excited to get stuck into this conversation. If you haven't already subscribed, please don't forget to subscribe, follow me. It is literally like a donation to the channel. It helps me keep doing what I'm doing, helps raise awareness about conditions that solely affect women. So thank you so much if you have subscribed, and if you haven't already, don't forget to click that button. Hi Jess, thanks so much for joining me today on the pod. So today we're going to be exploring women's mental health, which is such an important topic and something that I'm so passionate about. For those of my listeners who haven't already heard of you, do you mind giving me a quick intro?
Okay, yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me. So my name is Dr. Jessica Katanga. I am a medical doctor and content creator, and my passions are women's health and mental health and how they intersect. So I'm so excited about today's conversation.
Amazing. And obviously I know that mental health is such a huge issue that has had more light recently, but today I really want to explore what that means specifically for women. And leading up to this conversation, I did some research and the data is actually shocking. So the NHS has come out saying that 1 in 6 women in England are prescribed antidepressants, and 1 in 4 at any given time are living with depression, anxiety or another mental health condition. Why do you think women predominantly are suffering so much with their mental health?
So there's just so many factors as to why we're seeing the statistics. I mean, one part is a good thing in terms of mental illness, mental health. That's now a bit more of an everyday conversation. So women have always been struggling, but now we can actually come forward and we see that as a sign of strength and actually get the help that we so need and deserve. There's so many pressures on us in modern society, what women have to go through in terms of having periods or going through menopause, childbirth, things that we're going to get into in this conversation that also can be great challenges to our mental health.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that happen throughout our lives. I think we were speaking about this before, like are very underestimated or not really spoken about enough, like pregnancy, postpartum depression, etc. So I'm actually really intrigued because obviously I've been reading a lot of data about the misdiagnosis rate, and a lot of women who go to the doctor are misdiagnosed with things like anxiety or depression when they actually have conditions like endometriosis, PMDD, etc. And some of the data that I shared is that women are 50% more likely than men to have a heart attack misdiagnosed with anxiety or indigestion. Do you think, and that's not to kind of underestimate the stats, but do you think a lot of it is misdiagnosis?
That's something that is a real issue for women going to doctors and unfortunately not always being listened to. We need to make sure that we are not just typecasting women when they come to us and looking at the whole picture. And, you know, is there something wrong physically? Is there something wrong mentally? Or maybe both, and they're feeding into each other.
Do you think also it's kind of worse? And so say you have I have endometriosis, for example, and normally you're very like mentally well, but when you're going through these symptoms and they're not taken seriously, that actually makes mental health conditions worse when it didn't typically have to be. So instead of more biological, it's because that's not getting answers, or socially you're not getting the support, you're then going to suffer more mentally.
As we know, there's such long waiting times for like a formal diagnosis, so that itself can be anxiety inducing, and that itself is also quite grueling because it means lots of hospital appointments, that means missed days at work. So when we look at disease, we always think of it in the biopsychosocial model. So that means there's a biological component to it, there's a psychological, and there's a social. So delays in diagnosis, or that support system not being there either in our personal lives, professional lives, or in the world of medicine, that can all have impact on our well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And then can you talk us through what happens during the menstrual cycle hormonally? I know obviously the luteal phase is known for being very low, women are more anxious, and then ovulation, people are more ambitious, optimistic, etc. What is happening with our hormones throughout the cycle?
Exactly. So as you said, so there are 4 phases of our menstrual cycle, and on average it's about 28 days, give or take. And the first week is actually our bleeding week, so our menstrual phase, and that's when we're going to feel low in energy. We're literally like bleeding. And then the week after, that's our follicular phase, and our estrogen levels are rising. And then on our ovulation phase, the 3rd week, that's when our estrogen levels are our highest, and that's why we're feeling our most confident, our most sexiest, we're able to take on the world. And then we go into our luteal phase, where progesterone levels start rising. And then if we don't have if our egg is not met with a sperm, then our progesterone levels drop, and then we go into a menstrual phase again. So that rise in progesterone is what can cause that irritability, some fatigue and everything. And then for about 80% of people who have periods, they're going to experience some PMS. So that's like baseline irritability, fatigue, etc. But for some people, so about 5%, the last time I checked, they can have PMDD, which is a more severe form of PMS. And that stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, where people feel so low, so depressed, and it actually has an impact on their life every month.
We did an episode on PMDD, and it's 30% of women with PMDD attempt taking their own lives. It's really severe. So in medical school, when you got your qualifications, did they speak specifically about how women's mental health differs from men's? Did they speak about things like PMDD, hormonal fluctuations, etc.?
So we learnt about the hormonal cycle, the rise and fall of the estrogen, progesterone and testosterone. However, it wasn't really then a mapping onto then how does this affect women's well-being, like on a day-to-day. It was more the science behind it. And in terms of women's mental health specifically, that's now an emerging field where, historically, because most research has been done on men, because they don't want to do research on pregnant women and breastfeeding women, etc., then we have historically just been treated as little men and just thinking that, okay, well, what happens in them must happen to us. But it's actually now that we're appreciating, that we've got a whole own thing going on.
Yeah. I mean, how has, I know that you mentioned there that research has historically kind of not studied women. I think it was 1994 that women were first starting to be integrated into testing. But why is this problematic from a wider scale, especially in our generation? I mean, 1994, I was born in 1995. You know what I mean? It wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long ago at all. And it's problematic because when we're doing research, we want to think about, are these results generalizable? And if we're only studying half of the population, then we can't generalize it to the other half. And that's why when you were mentioning the heart attack things earlier, it's actually now that we're appreciating that heart attacks present differently in women because we have different pain thresholds to men. So it's very interesting that as women we're seen as like sissies or anything like that, because scientifically that is not the case.
It's the other way around.
It's the other way around. And so if we have our understanding, for example, of heart attacks, because as doctors it's about pattern recognition. So if the pattern recognition that we're learning is how it presents in a man, then when women come in, we're not gonna have that like knowledge base, to be able to think, could this be happening in a woman, but it's just happening in a different way because we never were exposed to that presentation.
It's so true. And I guess with the NHS, obviously the waiting list is so huge, and you only get 10-minute slots in the GP. There's no time to really explore, okay, your symptoms aren't, the typical what we're seeing. How is it differing? You know what I mean? That there is just less time.
Yeah, there's such little time, and I feel really sorry for GPs. So I didn't specialize in GP, I specialized in psychiatry. And for us, when I'm having a new patient in outpatients, I get an hour with them, and then for follow-up, it's half an hour. And I'm so thankful for that time because I'm able to explore in a way. But the way that GPs, for example, are forced to do medicine, it's just 10 minutes. And that really goes down to 8 minutes when you think about documentation and stuff. It's just like, it's really stressful for both patient and doctor.
Yeah, that is crazy. It's just not enough time. And then I guess that leads to my next question. So how are mental health conditions typically explored specifically within the NHS? So obviously we can look at treatment options, etc. But do they look at root causes in terms of trauma history, chemical imbalances, hormonal factors? How common is it in the NHS to have more of an investigative approach?
Yeah, so I work in psychiatry. I'm specialising in psychiatry. So as I said, we have more time. So we will take a full history, and in a psychiatric history, part of the medical history is taking a menstrual history as well. So if, for example, I'm seeing somebody, there's so many different things that can present to psychiatry. It could be low mood, it could be anxiety, it could be psychosis, it could be etc. But we have to think about how those symptoms, whether there's any pattern with somebody's hormonal cycle, and then also when you are an inpatient, because I work in inpatient and outpatients. So when you're an inpatient, when you're getting admitted, then we do something called like a formulation, and that's going into somebody's social history, so their childhood and their if there's any trauma, and so we have a whole pro forma. So trauma, social, financial issues, drugs, alcohol, things which goes into lifestyle. Those are all parts of our history as psychiatrists.
What do you think the major risk factors are for women for developing a mental health condition?
I guess because it's such a varied, when we're saying mental health condition, it would depend which mental health condition it is. But again, we think about things being contributed biologically, psychologically, and socially. So biologically, a lot of it is genetics, and that is part of the history that we're taking. Does anybody else in your family have this so-and-so mental health condition? And then we're thinking psychologically and socially, which kind of sometimes go hand in hand. So there are things, those stresses that we were talking about earlier in terms, okay, well, what do you do for work? Are you unemployed at the moment? Being unemployed is a risk factor for a lot of different mental health conditions. Are you partnered or not partnered, but are you feeling supported in that partnership as well? Domestic violence, trauma, all these different things. And then, periods and chronic health conditions.
Exactly. I mean, touching on trauma there is really interesting. So women statistically are more likely to experience trauma. Data shows that we're more likely to be victims of sexual abuse, domestic violence, and emotional abuse, particularly in childhood, or those more vulnerable years. Can you talk to me specifically about how trauma does affect women and how it might manifest?
It's a shame that trauma, all these things of sexual violence, it's just so common in a woman's life, and it's just absolutely awful. But in terms of how it affects us, so it affects us on every level. So it affects us biologically. So if you go through trauma, and especially if you're going through trauma in childhood, your brain is still developing, and our brains are not so interested in what's right. Our brains are interested in what's going to keep us alive. So then we can become more prone to being able to seek out danger. So actually the connectivity, so our brains are very neuroplastic, so they respond to external stimuli. So if you grew up in an environment which was very dangerous, then your fear centers, like your amygdala, your prefrontal cortex, they're going to be on high alert. And then that's when we can see things like anxiety in later life. Also, there's a link between childhood trauma and ADHD, for example, and things like that, because of the focus and pattern recognition, etc., as our brains are developing. Our brains are very neuroplastic. So the same way that when we were going through difficulty and strife, our brains learned that, oh, we're in danger, is the way that then now we need to, when we are able to now choose our own environments, try to retrain our brain. Actually, maybe those coping mechanisms that I had at that point, they were helpful, but now I no longer need them. So we can only start to heal once we're in safe environments. So that is definitely, our brain is plastic in both directions. Naturally, because as I said, our brains are more interested in survival. Unfortunately, we're more likely to pick up on threat rather than like positivity. It's the same way of it, like if you get like 10 positive compliments, but then you get one insult, like then that might stay in your brain for longer. And some of us have different temperaments, and that's okay. So we all have different starting points. So our temperaments, or the households that we came from, or the set of parents we have, etc., or our circumstances, but I believe that we can always strive for better once we know better.
And then I read something about maternal stress impacting fetal development specifically, and it can program a child's stress response system and create a biological predisposition. Is that true?
Yes, the conditions in which a mother is pregnant in most definitely has an impact on her body and therefore the fetal development. So it's really important that a woman can feel safe and it's supported through a pregnancy and once she's just given birth. For her and her offsprings, for the child development.
And then in terms of some other risk factors, so something that is really interesting and more people kind of speaking about now is that obviously hormonally women are on a 28-day cycle and our mood and physical symptoms are going to fluctuate throughout the month. But in society, we're kind of programmed to adopt a 24-hour cycle. How is that affecting women's mental health?
Again, like the world is designed with a man in mind, and then we kind of just like fit around that. So it's stressful because we live in a society where we still don't have menstrual leave. And for people who periods can be painful and awkward and uncomfortable already, and then if we think about the high rates of endometriosis and PCOS, that's really difficult, because how do you show up the same through every day of the month when you are not the same every day of the month? And then that has real life implications in the real world. The way that the world is set up and careers are set up is that it doesn't take that into account. And then you can actually get penalized for just responding to what your body is putting you through. So a lot of women's experience, if they have a chronic health condition, is disciplinary hearings or having to take time off work for doctor's appointments, for surgeries, recovery times. That's all really, really stressful.
It's so stressful. And companies can limit the amount of sick days. And yes, we have statutory sick pay, but it's like £100 a week or something, which is just not enough to live on in today's economy. And then I guess for other life transitions, menopause is a huge one, especially in the workplace. 60% of women saying that they struggle with brain fog and memory issues. Additional data coming out saying that a third of menopausal women report depression and 50% report anxiety or irritability. That must be so challenging to go to work every day, but also to show up in your own personal life. And then we also have pregnancy, postpartum, puberty. Pregnancy, this is fascinating. Suicide is still a leading cause of maternal death. I mean, what is your opinion on all this? Do you see in clinic a lot of women coming forward with these kind of life transitions?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. So yes, all these life transitions which are major, and it's a thing of that it's like, just because a lot of people go through it doesn't mean that it's not challenging. And I think that's why it's like so dismissed. It's just like, well, you're not the first person to go through puberty, you're not the first person to go through pregnancy, so why are you making a fuss? But it's actually like, no, it's just that our grandmothers maybe weren't allowed to quote unquote make a fuss, but it doesn't mean that they didn't have needs that were not being met. So yes, these different life transitions is something that we have to take into account when, again, taking a history, because somebody's mood can be affected by if they're still having periods or if they've started their periods. So right now I'm on CAMS, which is Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services. So, you know, when I'm talking to a young girl, I need to ask her, has she started her periods or not? Because that's going to change my thinking completely. And then for women in older age, and it's something at menopause, it's just something that is just not talked about in society. I think now older women are getting onto the main stage and talking about it more, but like I used to think that we would get a break once our periods finish, but no, it's it's more trouble awaiting us.
It's more trouble. And you know what's crazy, I was looking at retirement age and it's looking to go up to 68. And it's the same age for men as it is women. Obviously equality, that's fine, but like women go through menopause and it's really difficult as we get older.
Really, really difficult.
I guess so menopause specifically, I'm so intrigued, what's happening with our brains? Why is it affecting us mentally?
That's a great question. So we've had estrogen, progesterone, testosterone all through our lives. And then when we get to the menopause, estrogen and progesterone levels crash. And so if we think about, we were talking about what estrogen and progesterone does during our reproductive years, the estrogen is what was giving us energy and etc, etc. So for that to crash, it's our body then getting used to those new levels, or that's why then people need to replace those hormones, because it has both physical and mental consequences not having those estrogen and progesterone in your body anymore, because they're very protective against several different factors. So yeah, it's that drastic change in hormone levels is why we see the issues. And menopause can be misdiagnosed as so many different things because it can present to so many different people in terms of so many different like doctors. So yeah, menopause can be misdiagnosed as psychosis, bipolar, depression, and again, this is why it's important to make sure to take a history, to ask somebody, okay, what are your periods like? Because it's that the perimenopausal period, which can be confusing when people are still having periods, but if you get a history and you know that, oh, there's a change, then you can know that, okay, this is the perimenopause, and therefore the treatment is different. The treatment is to replace the hormones rather than treat the depression, etc.
What do you mean by there's a change?
The definition of menopause is not having a period for over 12 months. In the perimenopause, your pattern of periods is changing, so you're not exactly in the menopause yet. So it means that maybe you start to have less periods or irregular periods. So you don't just go from having periods to none. It's like a bit of a phase. Yeah.
How do you think we can be supporting women from a mental health point of view who are going through menopause and are still having to show up for work every day?
So I think the increasing conversation on different platforms is great, because it's something like, it doesn't have to be a taboo anymore. And knowing that other women are going through it as well, it literally means that you're not like, oh my God, am I going crazy? Because it can feel that way. So that's really helpful. And then a general understanding of like there's a thing that workplaces have to put in, which is accommodate, what's it called, the
reasonable adjustments.
Reasonable adjustments. So I know that some people with PCOS, for example, might have with their work something called slow mornings, where you know, you don't need to go in at 9. Maybe it's a thing of that, like you have a time period of when you need to come in, and these adjustments, we need to think a bit more outside the box, rather than just thinking, well, everybody needs to be in 9 to 5, because countries that have period leave, for example, there is no drop in productivity. There's actually increase in productivity and work and employee satisfaction. So I think it's just a thing of that, like, if we can keep on talking about it, then people can know that there's actually an issue around it, and then we can think of solutions.
Because there was recently the government petition about implementing menstrual leave, and it was declined. Did you see their reason? They said, so if you have something like endometriosis, it can be diagnosed as or labelled as a disability, and then it falls into you being protected with SSP, for example, etc.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't really fix the issue, does it? And then you can't diagnose everyone with a disability, you know what I mean?
No.
That has menstrual cycles. But I think Portugal implemented menstrual leave recently.
Recently, yeah, they did. Yes, exactly. So, and that's the thing. That's why, again, conversation is more important, so that more people can go to their doctors and they know what the symptoms are, and then maybe, hopefully, that route to diagnosis can be shorter, because I think at the moment it's about 10 years roughly before you get a formal diagnosis of endometriosis from the time of first presenting to a doctor. I think I know it's difficult, but I think let's just continue to take our sick days, because the life works, money talks. So actually endometriosis does have a big impact on the economy, for example. So if they see that, then that means that, okay, well, this thing, maybe we do need to put research into it.
God, money talks. But it's so interesting, because it's like, if women aren't being diagnosed with endometriosis, how can they then correlate that? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
like a vicious cycle. And then you've got one of the longest waiting lists on the NHS is gynecology. Gosh. And then just going back to age and kind of life transition. So I know you were mentioning younger women. So I pulled up an NHS survey that found that 36% of young women aged 16 to 24 were experiencing a common mental health condition. That's double the rate of young men. And then from 2012 to 2022, mental health related hospital admissions for girls aged 11 to 15 rose by 113%. Why do you think we're seeing such a high rate of mental health conditions amongst young women specifically?
For young women, it would be, again, the pandemic. So the pandemic was a period of isolation, especially during somebody's developmental years, and they have shorter lives. So they have a different perspective, which makes dealing with difficulties harder, because they have less life experience. So as I said, I'm working in CAMS at the moment, so with children and teens, that I think sometimes the way that they articulate their emotions, I don't think that I was able to articulate my emotions like that, when I was a teenager type thing, or in our schools. We didn't know those things of neurodiversity or something like that. So I think there is that increased awareness and emotional intelligence of that generation.
How old are you now, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm 28.
Oh my God, okay, wow, I'm 30. So we kind of grew up around the same time. Yeah, because mental health just wasn't spoken about at all.
It was not a thing.
It's crazy. But even now, like, and I think it's mainly because of social media, but terms like gaslighting and, things like that, I just didn't know beforehand. And now we've got kids that are growing up with that awareness, which I actually think is a really good thing.
Yeah, it is a really good thing. I think social media is great in terms of that increased awareness and that increased language. At the same time, sometimes too much knowledge can be a bit confusing, especially when you are growing up, because we're adults. Maybe we can see information and filter it and apply what is relevant to ourselves. But when you are a teenager, that might be very confusing. And I think then there needs to also be that parental supervision to, okay, I've seen this information online, then can I talk to my parents about it? How does this relate to our family or myself? And
So going into more kind of holistic things that women can be doing throughout their life, in their lifestyle, etc., for their mental health, what is kind of the package?
You need to be really in tune with yourself. If it's that you need to keep a diary or some type of log of like, okay, when do I feel best about myself? When do I feel worst about myself? Are there certain people around me at that time? What is it that I'm doing? Was it when I was working this job that I actually felt better, etc., etc.? And I would say always put it back to the basics. So the basics are nutrition, hydration, sleep, relationships, community. These are the things that make us movement. These are the things that mean that we can lead really healthy and just like live our best lives, essentially. So especially if we're having chronic health conditions, we need to make sure that we are eating well. So I know that it's like a meme that like as girls we can just like go the whole day and not eat.
Girl dinner, yeah.
Exactly, girl dinner. So you know, if you're in pain and you're having fish fingers for dinner, that's not gonna cut it. So you know, regular nutritious meals with varied colors. That's the way that you can make sure that you're having a good varied diet. There's different colors in your plate, making sure that we're well hydrated. So dehydration is going to increase any type of irritability and or pain. And then what else? So movement, so moving our body. And it's not just about what's trendy, it's about what works for you. So what fits in with your lifestyle and what movement you enjoy, that it will be sustainable. That actually releases endorphins, and then that can help with our mood and our pain levels, etc. And then community, so making sure that we're around people that we can be our full and authentic selves around. So they found that actually suppressing, there was this data and it was into black women in the workplace, and a lot of black women in the workplace feel they can't be their full selves, and that diminishing of yourself every day can actually lead to chronic stress and could actually lead to autoimmune issues. So you know, we have we not all of us have that much autonomy over our workplaces, but we definitely have autonomy over our friendship groups, over our romantic relationships. So having those safe spaces is actually crucial.
Community is such an interesting one, because I feel like we've kind of moved away from a more collective model, I suppose, where we're very isolated and we might work from home or just go to the office and not see many people in the day. So it's really important to kind of surround yourself with like-minded people. I do think social media sometimes helps, because you do find other people. I mean, we met through social media, so it does help sometimes.
Definitely.
And then actually, does it differ throughout the cycle? So what you should specifically be eating, movement, etc. Is there anything you'd recommend for women maybe in their luteal phase versus ovulation, for example?
Yeah, so that's something called cycle syncing. And that's, again, listening to your body. So you are not the same person the beginning of your cycle compared to the end, etc., etc. So when you have those higher energy levels, so during the, let's say, the follicular and ovulation weeks, then that's when you can be doing the more vigorous movements, for example, and the more socializing, and maybe you're going to be more confident at work. Maybe that can be the more client facing times that you have. And then during those the luteal phase and the menstrual phase, you can think of that more as like hibernation or your energy saving mode. So just keep up the habits, but maybe not push yourself to the limit. If you're a gym girly, that's not when you're going to be getting your PBs and things like that. But that might be when you're doing your walks and your yogas and your swimming, etc.
That's so true. My doctor said the same. Don't be doing like cortisol, like high intensity workouts when you're on your period. So it has helped me for sure. And walks are quite good for mental health as well.
100%. So they've actually, like, walking, your eyes are going about the place. So again, so walking without having a phone in front of your face. So walking, you're taking in the nature and everything like that. And the eye movements, I don't know whether you know anything of EMDR therapy.
I've heard of it,
So it's actually like a thing to so EMDR is a therapy involving eye movements, and it's for trauma, and that those eye movements during your walking is actually very good for your brain as well.
Wow. Oh my gosh, just in the current state, or can you kind of like help the trauma, or is it more just to feel good in the moment?
So let me think, what was it specifically? I can't remember the exact specifics, but it's like just good for if you're an anxious person. Like that's why they when you go out for a walk, you instantly feel better like afterwards.
Oh my gosh, what if I always walk when I'm anxious. What if I have like my headphones in and I've got a podcast? Is that, well, I suppose I'm still moving my eyes, right?
Yeah,
so it's
the
still
eye
as effective.
movement.
Okay, so eyes away from my phone. Got it. And then I actually had a question regarding more like pharmaceutical treatments. What is the difference between antidepressants and SSRIs?
Okay, that's a good question. So usually they're used interchangeably, and that's just because SSRIs are a type of antidepressant, and in the UK they're the first line So your sertralines, your fluoxetines, etc., like that. So when your serotonin is released, your brain then takes it back up again. So the SSRI will stop it from being taken back up again so quickly. So then they'll stay in your synapses for longer and hopefully increase your mood.
In terms of the future, is there anything that gives you hope in terms of the future of mental health research?
Yeah, most definitely. So pages like your own and podcasts like this one, where, you know, we are talking about women's health and the intersections of it and the intricacies of it on the main stage, I think that really gives me hope, because it means that there's less of a taboo about it, and we're seeing that talking about our struggles doesn't make us weak, it actually makes us strong and empowered. So, and that's why, you know, I'm passionate about, you know, coming on platforms like this or talking on my own platforms, etc., so that people know that they're not alone, and that they deserve, you know, care and good care. That definitely gives me hope. And then in my like medicine world, psychiatry world, women's mental health is an emerging field, and I believe that when I'm a consultant that it will be its own specialism, because right now we have like perinatal mental health, because we understand there's the unique mental health struggles around childbirth. But I think in the future we will appreciate and have an own branch of psychiatry which appreciates that these different phases that we've talked about, puberty, periods, menopause, childbirth, they, you know, are their own complex branch as well.
Thank you so much for coming on the pod today. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience?
No, I think we talked about everything. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to subscribe. And I say this every time, don't forget to comment your story below. It's so important that we create a community of women where we talk to each other, support each other, confide in each other, and share our experiences and insights. It's also important that the more we talk, the louder we are, the more awareness that we will raise. As I always say, it's so important for me to keep running my channel, to get subscriptions, engagement, likes. So please do subscribe, comment, like the video. It helps me to keep raising awareness about conditions that affect women. So thank you so much, and I'm so excited to see you next time on Behind the Waitlist.